Good evening, people. Titus here for part 10 of our Asteroids mini-series, and in this video, we'll create our Game Over widget so our player has a loss condition. Let's not waste any time and jump right into it. Alright, we're going to head into our widgets folder, and then we can right-click, go to User Interface, choose Widget Blueprint, and then click User Widget. We'll call ours WBP_Game Over. We can double click to open that up and dock it in our parent window. When working with widgets, I always like to start with a canvas panel. So you can search canvas, drag it in, and then you can use your scroll wheel to actually center or frame the canvas panel. Now I think for the game over state, we're just going to do a simple fade to black, and then we'll have some waterfall letters kind of come down and spell out game over, so nothing too crazy. To do that effect, we need an image, so we can drag an image out. We can go to our anchors, we can click full screen. We can go back to anchors, hold Control, and click full screen. It will kind of expand it out there. Under color and opacity, I'm going to change this to a black, and that completes my image. Now for the letters, I need individual text elements to be able to animate them separately. So we can just drag out a text element here. I'm going to rename this to be the letter G. I'm going to anchor this center screen, so I'm going to click center. I'm going to go back to anchor, hold Control, and then click center, and then it's slightly off, so you can go back to anchor and just hold Shift, click center, and then it'll put it perfectly centered. Now I'm going to change the text to be the letter G. And then I'm going to change the size to be 200, so it's a little bit bigger. I'm going to check the box for size to content, so it automatically centers my letter. And then I'm going to update the font to be the same pixel font that I'm using for everything else in this prototype. And I think that is pretty good for now. So what we're going to do is all those changes I made, we're going to basically just duplicate this letter, so I don't have to redo them on each individual letter. The only thing I need to update is just the position X value. So I'm going to shift this over -700, so it's kind of on the left side of the widget. And then I can just simply duplicate. I'm going to change this to letter A, update the text to reflect that as well. And then I can shift the X value to be -550. Each letter is going to be about 150 units spaced out. So we'll do nice even spacing. And then I'm just basically going to repeat that. So we'll duplicate here, change this to M, letter M, the position X, I'm going to set that to be -400. Then we can right click and duplicate. This will be our first E. Oops. Change the letter to be E as well. And then instead of -400, we'll go -250. And then we can duplicate that. This one's going to be the letter O. Update the text to be that as well. And now we're going to basically mirror our negative values into positive values. So the first one would be +250. And this would be our second E, so we got to do maybe E2 for the title. And then the text, you can just make it E. And then for the position X, this one's going to be +400. Although, whoops, I'm sorry, that needs to be the V. So, got ahead of myself there. So we'll do V for that. And then, yeah, position X is 400. And then we'll duplicate this. And this is going to be our E2. And then our position X for this one will be +550. And then we can duplicate that. And this is going to be the letter R. And position X for that will be 700. So we got our game over state. Pretty much how I want it to kind of end. Now to add the animation, we simply click the animation tab here. It'll bring up the workspace. You can hit the plus sign to add the animation, and maybe we'll just call it game over. When you select this, you can then add tracks for each element. That's why we had to use individual text elements so we can animate them separately. So I think starting off, we'll just do the image, so image underscore 0. And we're just going to, these are all the elements you can actually animate. I'm just going to change the opacity. And starting off, I want it to be transparent. And then I'm going to use a 5-second timeline. I will probably waterfall the letters between 0 and maybe 3 seconds. And then I'm going to black out the screen at like second 4 to 5. So we'll drag this over to maybe second number 4, and then we'll key in 0, and then we'll go to 5, and then we'll key in 1. So now our animation is basically going to be transparent, and then we'll move to opaque, and then we'll have the letters fall in the beginning of the animation. So let's move our timeline back to 0. We got to get the letters off the screen so we can't see them. The way we can do that is we can just go to track. We'll do all widgets. And we're basically just going to choose all the letters. We can ignore the ones that have the canvas panel slot. And as you select the letters, it'll actually remove them from the list, so you won't be able to double up on them. So there's G, there's A, there's M, there's E, there's O, we got the last time V, and our second E, which is E2, and then our R. So now we have all our letters. Now to make it easy, let's start with the first letter G. We'll add an element to track. This time we're going to be tracking transform. We can expand out transform. We're going to be messing with translation. I mean, if you want to mess with the other stuff, you can. The X is the left and right, and the Y, of course, is the up and down. So you can click and drag each way and kind of move it around. I find that I think -700 gets me off the screen. And then I can just key that in and it'll add a keyframe. Or if you would actually just do it under transform, just be easier. And then it adds a nice little keyframe there for you. And I think for the first quarter second, I'm going to key that, nothing's going to move. Now before I animate this letter, let's copy these details over to the rest of the letters. So what we can do is, when you expand out G, you can right click on the transform, and you can copy that element, and then we can collapse it, and then we can select, using control, all the other letters, so they're highlighted like that. And you can right click and paste, and it should move the keyframes that we made for the first letter. All right, that looks pretty good so far. So now we'll go back to G, and under transform, we can come about ½ second, and we'll move it into focus by putting it back at 0. So basically, it's kind of just like that. So now we can come to the next letter, which is going to be A, and under translation, we can key in the transform here, which is fine. And then at 0.75, I think we'll move it into focus at 0. Now it'll look like the G's shifting back up. I don't know why it does that. I think it's just, you can kind of ignore it. The letter should stay because it's animated down, so it should be fine. So you can ignore that for now. And that looks good there. So we can collapse A, and then we're going to go into M. And under transform, we can add a keyframe for M. We'll come to second number 1, and then we'll bring it into focus by putting it back to 0. And that keyframes that correctly. So now we'll go to our first E, key in the transform, and then we're going to go 1/4 second out, and then we'll just reduce this to 0, drops it in, and that looks good. So now we need the O, so we'll add a keyframe to update the timeline there, And then we'll come out another 1/4 of a second. We'll set that to 0. And that looks good. So now we need the V. Go ahead and key in that transform. We'll go out a 1/4 of a second. And we'll bring it into focus. And then it keys that for us. Now we need E2. And we'll go ahead and key that. And go out a 1/4 of a second. And then under transform, we'll bring it into focus by zeroing it out. And then last but not least, we got the R. So we'll add that transform. And then we'll go out a 1/4 of a second. And then we can just bring that into focus like so. All right, so let's see how that looks. I think that looks good enough for the simple prototype. So letters will drop down. You'll get to see it with the rest of the screen, and it'll black out, and then it'll be your game over state. So I think it looks pretty good. We can compile and save that. The next thing we'll want to do is we're going to leave our designer view, and we're going to go in the graph view real quick. We have a pre-construct and a construct. It's basically like kind of like begin play, basically when it gets created. So we have our game over animation on the left. That's kind of like a variable. You can drag that out and do play animation. And then you can come into here. We know it's a 5-second animation. What you can do is basically when that's playing, you can come into a delay. And you can either delay the length of your animation, or you can do a custom amount. I'm gonna wait a little bit after, so I'll do like an 8-second delay. And then for now, we're just gonna do open level by name. And then our level, we named it level 1 with no spaces. Basically, when this widget's created, it'll play the animation that we just made. It'll then wait 8 seconds, and it'll then restart the level. Pretty simple. But now we need to update to actually call this widget. So it makes the most sense to do it from our game manager, right? So we'll go to blueprints, open up our game manager, and then I believe on our respawn code, we're checking our lives, and then we're calling basically game over if our lives are 0. So I think from here we can just come into a create widget. And then of course we can choose our game over. And then we can come off the blue pin and just do add to viewport, and we'll just override what's currently on there. And then our player already casted to that, so it should be overwritten as well. So we should be good there. And then one other thing I want to change is this clear screen. What we can do is do shift delete, and I'll delete it and keep your pin connected. I want to actually call that only here on the respawn. So we'll do shift delete, and then we can come into clear screen, because I don't think we need to clear the screen on a game over. The level's going to be restarted anyway, so I guess it probably doesn't matter too much. But yeah, let's hit play. We got our lives counter. We can move around. We can get a little bit of a score. So there's the first life down, and the asteroids still get destroyed on the respawn. That one's gonna miss anyways, and then I can hit that one. I got 1 life left. There's my respawn. All right, so this should trigger our game over state. So there's the game over. You can see the rocks are still coming. The screen will turn black, and then it should restart the level. Kind of like so. All right, everyone, we'll cut the video here. In the next one, we'll tackle creating the UFO enemy type to add a little variety to our prototype. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and see you on the next one.